light and shadow.
Well, how do, shit kickers and city slickers? Welcome to Between Light and Shadow, the podcast that invites the Twilight Zone out for a showdown at high noon and happily takes a bullet for the team. This here's Cowboy Craig talking to you, and I'm here to guide y'all through an episode or two of the best damn television show to ever come down the pike, that there Twilight Zone. So saddle up and let's ride! Yeah! In its initial weeks on the air, the Twilight Zone presented a dark and moody psychodrama, Where Is Everybody? Then a lighter, more charming palate cleanser, One for the Angels. For its third episode, it returned to the dark and moody and tossed in a healthy dose of film noir atmosphere, dark shadows, psychological trauma, and an impending sense of doom. But it didn't take place in the city where you'd expect those kinds of demons to dwell. Instead, the show dropped us in the Old West. Mr. Denton on Doomsday opens on a dusty street. Now we know it's the Old West because there's a horse and wagon riding into town, plus the music has Western written all over it. Now, note that big cluster of radio towers up in the left corner of your screen. Now, I've talked before about how lots of stuff was probably not visible on the tiny low-res TVs of the time, but there's no way you couldn't see those. Now, today they would just go in and digitally erase them. If only they'd framed that shot a bit differently. Honestly, how could they not see that? George Clemens was an ace cinematographer, but that's just Bush League stuff right there. Come on, George, get your head in the game.
I gotta get my head in the game. You gotta get your head in the game. I gotta get my head in the game. You gotta get your head in the game. Come on, get my head in the game.
OMG, are you playing High School Musical in your podcast?
Maybe. You want to hang out and see if I play more of it?
No.
See, I'm trying to get my daughter to watch The Twilight Zone with me, so I'm compromising my own quality values by even playing that shit here. Kendall steadfastly refuses to watch anything in black and white, so it's kind of tough. I thought including her in the podcast might help, but so far, nothing. I thought about using it as a punishment, like if she gets a bad grade, she has to watch a Twilight Zone with me, but that would just reinforce the negative association, right? God, I feel like I've failed as a parent. I love classic TV and cinema with a passion. Black and white is so much more beautiful to me than color. How can my own offspring be so diametrically opposed? I mean, how awesome would it be to have a teenager on the show, bringing a young, modern point of view? Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. Not with this one. Anyway, back to the episode. Oh, look, there's the requisite saloon, and here comes this week's protagonist, Al Denton, staggering out onto the street, drunk as the proverbial skunk. There's a peddler nearby, dressed a bit like an undertaker, watching him intently. Now, a gang of good old boy assholes rolls out of the saloon and immediately starts picking on Al. The leader of the gang is Dan Hodeling, played by a very young Martin Landau. Note that he's wearing all black, and Al is wearing lighter earth tone colors. Well, I mean, I assume they're earth tones. You can't really tell in black and white. Hodeling almost looks like a caricature. Bad guy wears black, etc., but not quite. Might be Landau transcending his wardrobe. I don't know.
Let's see you pay for your drink. In your own inimitable fashion, huh? A song, Denton. How about it? How dry. Come on now, come on.
Come on, Denton.
Get up. Come on, Denton.
How dry I am. How dry I am.
Charlie, can't you break that up?
Nobody knows.
I don't like it any more than you do. The misery they give that guy out there.
How dry I am. Nobody cares. How dry I am.
It's a bit hard to watch, isn't it? That hodling cat is one sadistic bully if I ever saw one. Damn. Just look at those black, steely eyes and that vicious grin filled with soul-devouring teeth. Now, I imagine he would have turned out very differently if he'd grown up in modern times with all the anti-bullying campaigning happening. But as it stands, he's one of the most purely mean-spirited characters in the entire 5-year run of The Twilight Zone. A running gag in my blog was the periodic appearance of the obnoxiometer, which I used to gauge the show's most intolerably annoying characters. After all was said and done, Wally Cox in From Agnes with Love took top honors. Now, I haven't needed to bring the obnoxiometer into the podcast, yet anyway, but we do have something similar when it comes to people like Dan Hodeling.
You dick!
Yeah, but Dan the Man in Black Hodeling deserves something stronger than that. Something bigger.
You dick! 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 You dick! 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 You dick! 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 Dick!
You're a dick.
Apparently in the days before the internet or even electricity, a fun pastime was to give the town drunk even more to drink, but only if he earned it by singing. God damn. Have you ever tried singing when you're drunk? I've tried podcasting drunk, and it was a fucking disaster. Maybe someday I'll play a clip of that. I keep it as a reminder not to drink too much when I'm on the mic. Hard-ass hodeling doesn't stop there. Oh no, gang. He takes things a step further. After Al the alcoholic sings, Hodeling smashes the bottle against a post and tosses it into the street. Al proves just how much of a pathetic drunk he is by scooping up the jagged bottle and getting what little he can out of it. How does he not destroy his lips drinking out of that broken bottle? It's wince-worthy. I reach for my chapstick every time I see it. Now, immediately after, Serling serves up a hot, steaming bowl of instant pathos. The sight of Denton rolling around in the street, sobbing in agonized humiliation. It's kind of tough to watch. Kudos to Dan Duryea for really throwing himself into the role. I don't know if he was a method actor, but I totally buy that he's 3 sheets to the wind and scraping the bottom of the sorrow barrel. As Liz observes Al lying in the street, sobbing and twisting in the dust, a deep sadness is evident in her eyes. Revulsion, too, but mostly sadness. I get a sense of history between them, a backstory that we aren't privy to. Perhaps they were romantically involved in younger, happier times, and it was Al's drunkenness that drove her away from him. The possibility adds a welcome sense of depth to their brief interaction a bit later. Oh, and I think we need to keep in mind that Liz might be a prostitute. Now, not all saloon girls in the Old West were prostitutes. Some were just waitresses and innocent good time gals there to sing, dance, entertain. But some of them, or a lot of them, depending on whose version of history you're referencing, were in fact engaging in the world's oldest profession. Saloons often had a second floor, where you'd find crude bedrooms where the menfolk got their rocks off in between cattle drives and gunfights. Of course, you couldn't depict this in 1959 television, but this particular saloon does have a second floor. I'm just saying. The possibility, however unlikely, that Liz is a prostitute adds another element of tragedy to an already tragic situation. If she and Al did have a romantic past, his drinking may have very well led her to her current circumstances. Now, this is the Twilight Zone. Something weird's got to happen, right? Yeah, so a loaded pistol materializes out of nowhere right there next to Al. He picks it up without batting an eye. and it never seems to occur to him to simply use the gun on himself, which is a bit surprising. Many of Serling's desperate characters contemplate suicide, and poor Al has it way worse than most of them do. Mere seconds ago, he looked like he was real ready to die. Dastardly Dan Hoteling swoops in to fuck some more shit up and notices that his drunken little songbird is now packing himself some heat.
Hey, Gunner! Hey, where'd you get the artillery?
I found it right over there in the street.
Is that a fact? Hey, but it's a long time since you used one of them, isn't it, Rummy?
Yeah, a long time.
Maybe you could use it now. Yeah. Maybe you could even outdraw me.
No, I wouldn't know how to use it anymore.
Well, let's see you try. Come on, you and me'll draw.
All right, Dan, cut it out. It's
Go
not
on.
funny anymore.
Get away, Liz. They're gonna mean we're gonna have a showdown here. Come on, Gunner. Come on out here. Come on, Rummy. Come on!
The gun goes off in Al's hand and disarms Hoteling, and he's instantly surrounded by the bar patrons, congratulating him and marveling at his shooting skills. They pull him inside the bar, but Hoteling is right behind, and he is pissed. He got shot in his left hand, but now he's using his shooting hand.
Hey, Rummy! Face me, Denton!
It was an accident, Mr. Hoteling.
I'm gonna get this right in your stomach.
The gun goes off in Al's hand again, this time causing a chandelier to fall onto Hoteling's shooting hand, disarming him again. He's pretty much beat at that point. Al finishes the job by giving him the back of his hand.
And don't call me Rummy anymore.
I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty satisfying watching Hoteling get dispatched in such a public and humiliating fashion, even though we've only known him for a couple of minutes and we haven't really had time to develop a strong hatred of him. I also love how his co-thugs ditch him immediately to join in the celebration of Al's accidental victory. Fairweather fuckers. Charlie the bartender offers Al a drink on the house, because that's what you do when somebody in your bar is a notorious lush whose sole goal in life seems to be to drink himself to death.
No thanks. I've had enough.
Wow. First Al makes his nemesis his bitch, and now he's strong enough to quit the bottle cold turkey. Funny how a shitty day can completely turn around in 3 minutes TV time. Al's moment of supreme triumph is short-lived when he realizes what will come of it.
I guess it'll start all over again now. Every fast and fancy man who owns a gun will come riding in down that street. Only this time it'll be me face down, bleeding to death. I think I'll go in and get a shave. I want to look proper on the day I die.
If Al's got enough money to go get a shave, why does he have to perform in the street for drinks? Just wondering. Word travels fast, surprisingly fast for a time when there were no telephones, no radios, no internet. A couple of thugs pay Al a late-night visit to tell him that a gunslinger named Pete Grant is on his way to town, and he'll be gunning for a showdown. No way, says Al. I'm a new man. Right? Wrong. Al gives in immediately and agrees to do it. Now, for someone who clearly regrets his gunslinger past, he's awfully quick to slide back into that role when they present him with the Pete Grant challenge, which is not to be confused with the Pepsi challenge. It's a toss-up which has more potential for bloodshed. I mean, Al could just say no, right? What's Pistol Pete gonna do? Shoot him in the back? I'm guessing there was some kind of code of honor among these guys. I understand there's a lot of peer pressure, but he just managed to get himself straightened out. Look at him. He's all cleaned up. He's shaven. His hair's combed. He's dressed nice. Go get a job or something. Hey, maybe get deputized so the only shooting you're doing is in the name of the law. Now, while it is an inspiring, dramatic moment when Al gives up drinking on the spot, it does stretch the limits of credibility a bit. Now, later, His trembling hands make target practice more or less impossible, and we don't know if he's just suffering a bad case of nerves, which he is, or if he's suffering physical withdrawal symptoms, which he should be. Could be both, I suppose. Speaking of target practice, how can he afford bullets? How is he paying his rent, for that matter? He appears to be a homeless drunk when we meet him. Maybe he does odd jobs for room and board? He may very well be a functioning alcoholic, but he didn't appear to be functioning when we first met him, did he? So the target practice is a disaster. Al couldn't outgun a blind horse, much less a quick-drawn dude half his age. So he packs up what little shit he has and heads out of Dodge. Now that peddler from the prologue intercepts him and offers him a freebie.
Fate's the name. Henry J. Fate. Here. This is one of my potions. You might call it that, or an elixir. I call that my fast gun developer. Man who drinks that becomes the fastest of the fast. He'll be able to shoot a hole through a silver dollar in midair at 100 feet or better without even aiming. It's guaranteed to last for 10 seconds.
10 seconds. And after that?
Well, after that, the user's on his own.
Hey, wait, this is the second episode in a row with a peddler. The previous episode was one for the Angels, where we had Lou Bookman. This week, we have Henry J. Fate. Could Henry J. Fate be an ancestor of Lou Bookman? Henry J. Fate is played by Malcolm Atterbury. And here's a cute little piece of trivia. He'll come back for another Twilight Zone, Season 4's No Time Like the Past, in which he plays Professor Elliot, another traveling peddler of elixirs and tonics. In my blog, I filed this under So Coincidental It Must Be More Than a Coincidence. I may have mentioned this before, but I have this thing where I want every episode of The Twilight Zone to coexist in the same universe somehow. So I'm going to assume that Henry J. Fate changed his name between seasons 1 and 4 to be less obviously an instrument of cosmic justice. Now, according to Wikipedia, and why would you not trust Wikipedia implicitly? I mean, anybody can go in and change anything, so, everyone's honest on the internet, right? According to Wikipedia, Malcolm Atterbury's best-known role is in Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest. He's the guy waiting for the bus out in the middle of nowhere who lets Cary Grant know that there's something up with that plane that keeps circling around.
That's funny. What? That plane's dusting crops where there ain't no crops.
That's interesting. He starts out all congenial and friendly when he's pushing his potion on Al, but he turns suddenly and decidedly unfriendly when Al doesn't want it.
Go ahead. Drink it.
Jesus, dude. We haven't had a reason to think this fake guy is any kind of a threat, but after that, well, it could go either way, I guess. So Al gives in to the peer pressure again and chugs the fast gun developer, which is supposed to last 10 seconds, and then takes out a poor innocent lantern across the way without even aiming. Minor quibble. Henry J. Fate is keeping track with his pocket watch, and based on his count, Al fires at about 5 seconds. Now, I timed it myself. He actually fires a full 9 seconds after he drinks the potion. By the time Fate's watch hits 10 seconds, it's actually been 18 seconds total. So Fate's watch is running at about half speed. So maybe he forgot to wind it and it was running down? Or maybe it takes a few seconds or so for the potion to kick in. Maybe this is not an exact science. If it's even science. But the potion seems to work. So now Al can face off against Pete Grant with confidence. At the appointed time, Al swallows the potion and is shocked to see Pistol Pete swallow what appears to be an identical potion. Wait, what? Both men look confused, shocked, a little scared. They draw. They fire. And, ironically enough, shoot the guns out of one another's hands.
This is a push, boys. No winner.
Now, that little time counting discrepancy before, Well, that was peanuts compared to the gross time distortion that occurs during the showdown. They don't fire until a full 30 seconds after drinking their potions, which again, are supposed to only last 10 seconds. And at least Pistol Pete looks like he's in some pain when he gets shot. Al just winces once and then acts like nothing has happened. The town doctor, who may be an ancestor of the insanely incompetent doctor from One for the Angels, diagnoses him with a single glance, proclaiming that Al won't be shooting with that hand anymore, with literally no examination whatsoever. He wraps Al's hand clumsily without bothering to disinfect the wound, much less checking to see if the goddamn bullet's still in there. I get that it's the Old West, but come on, it wasn't the Dark Ages. As Pistol Pete turns to go, Al has a few thoughtful parting words for him.
Just like me. You'll never be able to fire a gun again in anger. You're blessed, son. We've both been blessed.
Well, couldn't he just learn to shoot with his left hand? I mean, Hoteling showed off his ambidextrous skills earlier, so the script has already set that precedent. And speaking of Hoteling, what happened to him after he got his ass handed to him? He doesn't seem like the type to go away quietly, but he apparently drops off the face of the earth after Act 1. When Pistol Pete goes outside to meet up with his gang, they ask how it went. Doesn't it seem like they would have been inside watching the gunfight? You know, like offering moral support or whatever? I find it strange that they're just hanging around outside while Pistol Pete goes in and does his thing. And maybe this is just my ignorance of the period rearing its ugly head, but what's the ultimate end game of these gunfights? I get that sometimes conflicts were resolved in this fashion, but Pistol Pete rides into town with the sole purpose of proving that he's a faster gun than Al with no prodding whatsoever. Is there like a monetary prize involved? Exactly what are the perks of being the fastest gun in the West? I want to know.
Did you get him, Pete?
No more than he got me.
So Pistol Pete and his pugnacious posse ride out of Dodge, and after a bit, Henry J. Fate heads out as well, but not before he exchanges a friendly nod with Al. So he's not a bad guy after all. I mean, yes, he did deceive Al and Pistol Pete, and he did get him shot and permanently maimed, Pistol Pete too, but I guess he taught Al, and yes, Pistol Pete as well, a valuable life lesson, which is... don't shoot people, or else a supernatural entity will appear and take away your shooting hand? It's an O. Henry style irony thing, having both of them take the same potion and suffer the same injury, but it feels, I don't know, sloppy somehow. O. Henry stories are generally sharper and cleaner. Hey, I just noticed something. O. Henry J. Fate? I wonder if Serling named him that as a conscious reference to O. Henry. I hope so. I really love that kind of stuff. The real story here isn't Al learning that it's bad to shoot people. He already knows this. He clearly feels shame for his past behavior. The real story is Al overcoming his alcoholism, or at least it should be, but this life-changing, victorious achievement only amounts to a quick story detail. He just decides on the spot to stop drinking, which I'm sorry, an alcoholic cannot do. It's silly and super unrealistic. Plus, he'd still be stinking drunk at that point, after swallowing that giant tumbler full of liquor just a few minutes before, so he wouldn't be in his right mind anyway. But let's just ignore all of that for a second. So now Al is sober, and he's got a new lease on life. He can marry Liz, he can have a whole mess of kids, or whatever. But you know, all of that can happen without him ever getting his right hand all shot up, right? It's kind of like Martin Sloan getting the permanent limp in walking distance. And then there's Hoteling, who could, in theory, change his stereotypically dastardly ways and turn into a real stand-up kind of guy. But we never see him again, which is sloppy too. Instead, we introduce an entirely new antagonist and tell a different, connected, but different story. Serling could have just fleshed out Act 1 and had it end with Al vowing to give up the booze. Hodling got dealt with, the disillusioned underdog came out on top, and the future is bright. It's tidier, cleaner. We would lose the O. Henry twist, but do we really need it here? I'm not saying it's a bad episode. I actually like it quite a lot. I'm just saying it could have been better. But this is the script Serling wrote, and it's actually pretty effective as is. Of the 3 episodes that had aired so far, Walking Distance, One for the Angels, and this one, I think I like this one best. The fact that Dan Duryea's in the lead might have a little something to do with that.
I need at least $1,000.
Ouch!
Well, you got him softened up. Now, push him around a bit.
He seems to get scared when I talk about money.
Listen, baby, you got him right where you want him. He's on the hook and can't get off.
He can walk out, can't he?
He's got a wife, hasn't he? Just drop a hint that his wife might find out about this apartment and he'll shell out fast.
That's blackmail.
It's only blackmail, baby, when you're dumb enough to get caught.
Dan Duryea came onto the scene in the 40s in film noirs like The Woman in the Window and Scarlet Street, both directed by Fritz Lang, Black Angel, Crisscross, Too Late for Tears, and he became notorious for his specific behavior that is considered quite loathsome nowadays. As the czar of noir himself, Eddie Muller, reports in his book Dark City, The Lost World of Film Noir, during the 1940s, Dan Duryea developed an odd, almost fetishistic on-screen forte, beating women. His caddish behavior evidently struck a chord, especially in women. Duryea started getting fan mail by the truckload, most of it from infatuated females. Producers developed more inventive ways for Duryea to backhand co-stars. Wow. Just wow. God damn, the 40s were different. Now, you watch enough old movies and TV shows, you will see a lot of women getting slapped. Now, I personally in no way condone violence against women, even though my wife totally deserves to get smacked once in a while.
Hey!
Honey, I'm totally kidding. Have I ever once smacked you? Ever? Honey? Honey? Anyway, after the 40s, Duryea did mostly westerns, which is probably how he ended up in this episode of The Twilight Zone, and as far as I can tell, he was nothing like the woman-smacking asshole he played in films. He was married to the same woman for 35 years, quite uncommon in Hollywood, and he died 1 year after she did. Sounds like a good guy to me. You hear that, honey bunny? Long-term monogamy for the win! I'm all about that life thanks to you. Bunny, come on, don't be like that. You know I adore you. Come here. Please. Kendall, tell your mom to come here.
You're on your own, cowboy.
So I love film noir, as I think I've stated before on this podcast. And completely coincidentally, I was watching 1949's Black Angel the other day, in which Dan Duryea plays an alcoholic songwriter. And he has this moment where he explains how he ended up going on his latest bender.
Outside.
And you didn't go in?
Not a chance. I was given the brush off by a very large doorman. So, I found a saloon. And then another. And I kept on finding them.
Sounds a bit like Al Denton's backstory, doesn't it? Rod Serling's Mr. Denton on Doomsday is the only Twilight Zone directed by Alan Reisner, unless you count Serling's The Time Element, which he sold to CBS in 1957 as the intended pilot for The Twilight Zone. CBS bought it, but did nothing with it, so it ended up being produced as a one-off by Westinghouse's Desilu Playhouse, with Alan Reisner at the helm. Now, the buzz created when it aired made CBS reconsider, and The Twilight Zone was given the official green light in 1959. Alan Reisner would cross paths with Rod Serling again, but we'll put a pin in that for just a bit. Dan Hodling is, of course, played by Martin Landau, and like Malcolm Atterbury, he'll come back later for another Twilight Zone, Season 5's The Jeopardy Room. Genre fans know him from The Outer Limits, Space 1999, Mission Impossible. He is wonderful in everything he does. He received a well-deserved Academy Award in 1995 for his portrayal of Bela Lugosi in Tim Burton's Ed Wood.
Home. I have no home. Hunted. Despised. Living like an animal. The jungle is my home. But I shall show the world that I can be its master. I shall perfect my own race of people. A race of atomic supermen that will conquer the world.
Like Malcolm Atterbury, Martin Landau also appears in Hitchcock's North by Northwest. He plays a henchman who seems to have a bit of a crush on his boss, played by James Mason. And really, who can blame him? It's James effin' Mason.
You must have had some doubts about her yourself. And still do.
Rubbish.
Why else would you have decided not to tell her that our little treasure here has a belly full of microfilm?
You seem to be trying to fill mine with rotten apples.
Sometimes the truth does taste like a mouthful of worms.
Truth? I've heard nothing but innuendo.
Call it my woman's intuition, if you will. But I've never trusted neatness. Neatness is always the result of deliberate planning.
She shot him in a moment of fear and anger. You were there yourself. You saw it.
Yes. And thereby wrapped everything up into one very neat and tidy bundle. A, she removed any doubts you may have had about her, what did you call it, her devotion? And B, she gave herself a new and urgent reason to be taken over to the other side with you, just in case you decided to change your mind.
You know what I think? I think you're jealous. No, I mean it, and I'm very touched.
Landau also contributes a great commentary track for Mr. Denton on Doomsday on the Twilight Zone DVD and Blu-ray sets.
I played the town bully. I was playing a lot of bad guys at that time, doing a lot of westerns, which was interesting for a kid from Brooklyn. I played a pretty sadistic fellow on this show, as I remember. Rod did these things with us. I remember another one that I did. I mean, Rod was actually there and taking, in the early days particularly, was taking this show very seriously. And I think that's one of the reasons why the quality is as good as it is.
Now, if you're checking your Season 1 DVD and you can't find the Landau commentary track, or any commentary tracks for that matter, you've got one of the basic episode-only editions, to which I can only shake my head slowly and offer my condolences. There's so much great material on the deluxe editions. Well worth seeking out, unless you're just a casual fan. But if you're listening to this podcast, I'm guessing you're more than just a casual fan. Now, if you're a DVD-only household, you want the definitive DVD collection. Make sure it says definitive on it. Now, they're out of print, but they're still pretty easy to find and fairly cheap, too. There's also this super deluxe edition that comes in a 5x5 cube that has the entire definitive series, plus the 80s Twilight Zone series and some other stuff. But that's going for like $300 on Amazon right now. Now for Blu-ray, you're safe getting the existing sets, either season by season or in the complete series set. But those are starting to get kind of pricey since they're out of print. But there's a new complete series Blu-ray coming out on December 13th for about $80, which is a killer deal. And yes, it's got all the bonus features on it, so if you don't already have the Twilight Zone in high def, that's the set to get. I might pick it up just so I have a duplicate set in case some random disaster befalls the ones I already have. If there's anything in my collection that I should have two of, it's the Twilight Zone on Blu-ray. Seriously, it's that great.
I think everything's going to be all right now. Understand? But Charlie says you're as good with a gun now as you ever were.
Also in the cast of Mr. Denton on Doomsday is Jean Cooper as Liz, who is probably best remembered today for playing Catherine Chancellor on the soap opera The Young and the Restless for a staggering 40 years. She's also the mother of actor Corbin Burnson, which was an awesome little bit of trivia back in the 80s, but now, I don't know. He's kind of a cheeseball. And I guess he was a cheeseball in the 80s too, but somehow it kind of worked when he was on LA Law. Mr. Denton on Doomsday is stock scored, so there's no original music here. We do get a couple of Bernard Herrmann cuts from Where Is Everybody, plus what you're hearing right now is a cue called Albany from a score he did for the Ethan Allen story, a pilot for a series which was never picked up. There's also something kind of cool here. So the majority of Twilight Zones don't have original scores. They use various cues from the CBS Music Library. Now, in Mr. Denton on Doomsday, they combine multiple cues. I don't mean they segue into one another, I mean they play at the same time. In the tense build-up to the final showdown, the ominous drum rolls from the aforementioned Albany play underneath a track of generic timpani beats, both of which continue playing while a third cue starts, Fear Number 2 by Lucien Moraweck. Now, the first two continue playing as Fear Number 2 segues into another cue called Night in the Desert by Dmitri Tiomkin, which breaks the tension. It's like a multi-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, and it's a great example of the immense creativity that went into selecting stock music for the show. It wasn't just a matter of grabbing arbitrary tracks to fill space between dialogue scenes. As we see here, it was a unique and complex form of audio collage, presaging the looping and layering that would become so common in modern music. Here's a fun little bit of trivia. Alfred Hitchcock Presents aired a somewhat similar story with a Western setting a few years earlier, which also aired in the third week of its first season, coincidentally enough. Triggers in Leash was broadcast on October 16, 1955, and was directed by Don Medford, who would go on to direct a total of 5 Twilight Zones. Now, the episode concerns a shootout that's set to take place at midnight, and the clever manner with which a peaceful saloon proprietor intercedes. She secretly causes her clock to stop just short of midnight, and convinces the gunslingers that the malfunction is a sign from God that they should make peace.
You're both men of your word. And I heard you both swear you wouldn't draw till that clock reached noon. Well, the good Lord's gonna hold you to that word. Neither one of you can outdraw him.
After Mr. Denton on Doomsday, the Twilight Zone would present a number of episodes in a Western setting, but oftentimes that setting was reached via some sort of time travel mechanism. This episode, however, is a pure Western, with a dash of the supernatural, which was pretty unusual compared to the Western shows of the time, which consisted largely of your typical cowboys versus any number of quote-unquote villains. Bank robbers, cattle rustlers, thieves, and murderers, and yes, Indians. Remember, this was a less enlightened time. Despite the relatively limited range of story possibilities, the Western was the single most popular television genre of the 50s and 60s. Many of them are still quite well known today. Gunsmoke, Bonanza, The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, Rawhide. But many are practically forgotten. How many of you have ever heard of, much less seen, shows like Cowboy G-Men or Steve Donovan, Western Marshal? The Western was pretty much gone by the time I started watching TV as a kid, but I do remember seeing Bonanza and the Lone Ranger reruns, and Little House on the Prairie was in its first run, which I guess is technically a Western, right? My point? I don't really have a lot of experience with the genre. I've seen a few of the more modern Western films, Unforgiven, Tombstone, Young Guns, but classic Western films? Not so much. Classic TV Western shows? Not so much again. I've just never been interested. And I wasn't into cowboys as a kid. I was all about superheroes and sci-fi. Now, there is a picture of me as a little kid wearing a cowboy hat and brandishing a plastic six-shooter, so I don't know, maybe my memory is a bit questionable.
Maybe?
Hey, you can't give me the silent treatment and be the peanut gallery. You gotta choose. Yeah, that's what I thought. Anyway, there ain't much in the way of westerns on TV these days. Well, there's Hell on Wheels on AMC, and of course Westworld on HBO, which is spectacular, and maybe one or two others I'm not aware of, but it's certainly not a prevalent genre now. But back in 1965, television was positively rife with westerns. And while the first season of The Twilight Zone was still in production, it was unknown whether or not the show would be renewed for a second season. To cover his bases, Rod Serling wrote a 1-hour pilot for an unconventional Western series about a post-Civil War captain coming to terms with the death and destruction he's witnessed. And just like they did with his time element script, CBS didn't bite. Not really a problem for Serling, since The Twilight Zone ended up being on the air for another 4 years. But when it ended in '64, Serling had the opportunity to bring his unique Western to life.
In the aftermath of the bloodletting called the Civil War, thousands of rootless, restless, searching men traveled west. Such a man is William Colton. Like the others, he carried a blanket roll, a proficient gun, and a dedication to a new chapter in American history, the opening of the West.
The show was called The Loner. It aired on CBS from September 18th, 1965 to March 12th, 1966. A total of 26 episodes comprised the series. Alan Reisner, who directed Mr. Denton on Doomsday, did direct an episode of The Loner, but not the one we're looking at here. Dan Duryea appeared in an episode, but we're not looking at that one either. No siree, Haas. We're starting at the very beginning with the pilot episode. As most pilots do, the first episode sets the tone and gives us the backstory. An Echo of Bugles is written by Serling and directed by Alex March. The opening titles tell us it's 1 month after Appomattox. We're in a saloon. William Colton enters and orders a beer. An old man sits quietly at a table drinking, and there's a young hothead at the bar peacocking for a barmaid. He spies a Confederate flag behind the bar and starts mocking Robert E. Lee, then turns his attention toward the old man.
That's gray you're wearing, ain't it?
Why?
Why? Hey, he wants to know why. Well, I'll tell you why, mister. Why, you ain't so smart after all, are you? I like to know what side a man's on. What side are you on, mister?
Oh, I have no side, son. I just walk the fence and hope there be no strong wind.
You fought in a war, didn't you? What outfit was you in?
18th Brigade.
18th Brigade. My brother was in the 18th Connecticut. Was you in Connecticut, mister? I asked you a question, mister. Was you in Connecticut?
18th Texas Volunteer Infantry, Confederate States of America. Now, what'll be your pleasure, Sonny?
I think my pleasure would be to find out just where you place your allegiance now. To the Union? Or to this rag here?
So like in Mr. Denton on Doomsday, Serling gives us a loudmouthed punk who bullies, terrorizes those around him. But here's the big difference. Martin Landau is a great actor, even in his early stuff, and he makes a convincing bad guy. And Tony Bill as Jody Merriman, not so much. It's especially painful when he's sharing screen space with the likes of Lloyd Bridges and Whit Bissell. This kid can't act. I can't comment on what kind of guy Mr. Bill was off camera.
Oh, no!
Not that Mr. Bill. Now maybe Tony Bill was a sweetheart in real life, but his character here, well, just like Dan Hodling before him, Jody Merriman fails the dick test rather spectacularly.
You dick!
Jody roughs up the old guy, and that's when our hero William Colton steps in to dispense some whoop ass.
I don't owe any allegiance to that flag either, but too many good men died for it to let me sit by and see it get desecrated by a dirty little loudmouth who had no hand in bringing it down. A loudmouth who was still sucking milk and candy drops while his flag was in the breeze.
Man can't help being too young to fight in a war.
That's right. And a licked-up boy is no judge of those who didn't.
Jody storms out, then skulks around outside until Colton exits the saloon.
All right, it'll take me a little while to sober up. I'll meet you up on Rogers Hill in about an hour. We'll draw up there, fair and square.
Listen, I don't want to stand on a killing. You want an apology, huh, kid? All right, you got it. I'm sorry that I ruffled up your feathers. Does that do it?
No, I want to hear you admit you was wrong. Am I going to hear that from you?
Not this year.
All right, then. I'll be up on Rogers Hill in an hour. Will you?
I'll be there if that's your pleasure.
That resignation in Colton's voice sounds a lot like Al Denton's when he agrees to the shootout with Pete Grant, doesn't it? Colton goes up to Rogers Hill, and that's where we see his backstory unfold.
Charge!
It's a flashback of a Civil War battle. Yanks and Confederates engage one another in a visceral bloodbath. But it's TV, so there's no blood. But there doesn't need to be. It's a memory we're watching. A surprisingly well-staged and detailed memory for a TV show. It's presented in slow motion, an effect which blankets the horrific action in an ethereal, dreamlike quality. A young Confederate jumps at Colton from out of a tree, and Colton instinctively skewers him with his sword. It's then that the news breaks.
Lee just surrendered at Appomattox. The war's over. Thank God. It's all done.
It would appear that we must lay down our arms now.
It would appear to me, Captain, that it was about time.
And that young Confederate?
Well, that'll be the picture in my head, Colonel. A 16-year-old kid skewered on a sword like a piece of meat.
Remember Al Denton's memory of the kid he shot down?
Until one morning, the guy who asked me to prove it turned out to be 16 years old. I left him there on his face, right there in front of the saloon. I left him there bleeding to death with my bullet in him.
The war is over. Colton resigns his commission. He's seen enough death, enough misery.
Colton, you're West Point. You're 12 years cavalry. All that to be chucked away because of one dead Confederate boy?
The next death that I have a hand in, the next killing, if ever I have to kill again, I want it personal. I want to be able to choose. If some boy has to die at my hands, I don't want it sanctioned by an act of Congress, or my regrets ended by an armistice.
And you'll go where?
I think west. Try to get the cannon smoke out of my eyes, noise out of my ears. Maybe some of the pictures out of my head.
A killing is a killing, Mr. Colton. And a death is a death, with or without bugles.
Well, I guess I'd like to find that out for myself. Sir.
And then we're back to the now. The count is up. Both men turn to shoot. And Colton prevails.
That's a nice clean hole. Good safe distance from the heart. Son, you got two places to go. First to a doctor to get that cleaned out, then to a minister to thank the good Lord that you're still breathing.
You could have gone 6 inches lower. You could have killed me. You had your chance. What happened?
I had my chance once before.
And with that, Colton gets the hell out of Dodge, heading west to new weekly adventures in new towns, meeting new people and getting mixed up in new conflicts. The loner is basically the fugitive, only he's not played by David Jansen, and he's not wanted for his wife's murder. But yeah, an Echo of Bugles is very similar to Mr. Denton on Doomsday, isn't it? Like Al Denton, William Colton must face his violent past, but in doing so, he manages to stop a young buck from following in his footsteps. Only Colton isn't getting help from a potion dispensing... well, what exactly? What is Henry J. Fate? Is he an angel or some other supernatural entity taking human form to subtly intervene in the lives of troubled souls? Is he a benevolent warlock spreading redemption through his mystical concoctions? Or could he be the physical embodiment of the Twilight Zone itself, dispensing cosmic justice in tiny metal vials? Back to the loner. This was something of a holy grail for Rod Serling enthusiasts like myself, since it's been rarely if ever seen on TV since its original broadcast. I think it got some play on TV Land at some point, and there were some episodes floating around on YouTube, but a quality, complete home video release? No. I first read about the show in Mark Scott Zickery's Twilight Zone Companion, and it's always kind of floated around someplace in the back of my mind. I never thought it would get released, so I never really focused on it. Plus, again, I'm not a big Western guy. But when I heard about the DVD coming out, I got kind of excited. So it came out as a Walmart exclusive on June 14th. Then it got a wider release in September, according to Amazon. I got it as a Father's Day gift, so I immediately threw it on that day and watched an Echo of Bugles. And it was good. I mean, I'm probably not qualified to gauge the quality of a Western, but it was good. I enjoyed it. Lloyd Bridges was the goddamn man, and I will watch Whit Bissell and John Hoyt in anything. The production was handsome, particularly that Civil War battle set piece. And it was something from Serling that I'd never seen, so it had automatic value for that reason alone. It was good. But if I'm being honest, I didn't care. I wasn't moved. I'm not into Westerns. I'm not a Civil War buff, so I appreciated it for what it was and then moved on, except to make a mental note to mention it when I covered Mr. Denton on Doomsday. And as of yet, I haven't gone back to watch the other 25 episodes. But, well, okay. Here's a glimpse behind the scenes at Between Light and Shadow. In preparation for the podcast, I watch the episodes and record my thoughts with a little portable recorder, and then those recordings form the basis of my notes for the podcast. So I rewatched An Echo of Bugles the same way, with the tape running, not really expecting to capture anything terribly insightful or useful, but as I watched it again, something happened. See, a lot went down in between those two viewings, between June and November. Our country went through a bitter presidential election that divided us as a people like nothing I've ever seen in my entire 47 years on the planet. And a month later, we're still pretty goddamn divided. And as I rewatched An Echo of Bugles, the tape caught me getting completely caught up in how suddenly timely it was, and realizing with horror that our divided nation now isn't so different from the post-Civil War divided nation of over a century ago. I caught myself running the gamut of emotion from shock to anger to fear. This was less than a week after the election, and I think, I guess I hadn't quite accepted the outcome, or at least it hadn't quite sunk in. But now, watching this punk-ass kid belittling and assaulting this old man simply because he fought for the other side, because he had a different set of values, because he was different, period. This innocuous TV show from over 50 years ago got real relevant real fast, because this kind of shit is happening now in various pockets of our country. A coworker of mine, a really cool person who happens to be African American, was accosted recently by a car full of white people who yelled horrible racist slurs at her as they drove past her. This isn't some distant story in my Facebook feed. This happened right here to somebody I know. somebody I care about. And this likely wouldn't have happened before the election. Suddenly, it's okay again to be racist, to be intolerant, to hate and fear those who are different from us white folk. I'm a white, heterosexual man in America. I have nothing to fear personally from a Trump presidency. But many of the people I care about are people of color, are in the LGBTQ community, and they're scared. And they're already being harassed and threatened, and Trump isn't even in office yet. And no, Donald Trump isn't going to personally assault an African American or a gay person. But some who follow him will, and they will do it in his name, because now it's okay again to hate, publicly, proudly, violently. There's always been racism and intolerance, but it felt like we reached a point at which those things, those shameful aspects of us, were on the decline, pushed into the shadows of shame, and that maybe we were at least approximately heading toward a more enlightened age. It suddenly feels now like all the progress we've made is in real jeopardy, and hatred has been given license to thrive once again. And I wasn't going to talk about any of this here on the podcast. It's too ugly. It's too soon. Plus, I don't think this is the proper forum for my political views. I mean, I do put a lot of personal stuff into this podcast, but somehow the election just didn't seem an appropriate thing to talk about. I decided, at least semi-consciously, to draw the line right there. But Serling was a deeply political man, very liberal in most respects, and much of his work was designed to convey his political points of view. And God, how I wish he were here now to comment on where we are today as a nation. I believe he would be appalled, horrified, deeply disappointed that we still tear one another down, that we still aren't learning from the mistakes of the past. And I think that he would be fearful for what the next few years might hold. And I'm not just talking about Trump supporters here, believe it or not. I'm talking about all of us, conservatives, liberals, all of us. This hasn't been a one-sided battle. None of us has taken the high road in any of this. There are people in my life that I may very well never speak to again because of the ugly aspects of themselves that they've put on display over the last few months. But isn't that a form of ugliness too? The refusal to forgive? Maybe the Civil War never really ended. Maybe it never will. So this episode was supposed to be released last week, but things just sort of piled up on me and I wasn't able to get it done. This does seem to happen to me periodically. Life gets busy, things go a bit sideways, and suddenly my routine becomes progressively less manageable. I can usually juggle things around some and hold it at bay for a while, but ultimately, inevitably, that demanding bitch...
Hey!
Not you, sweetie. I mean that demanding bitch real life. She gets all up in my business, and I've just got to stop, refocus, and sort shit out. And now that it's the holiday season, I fear I'm going to have even less time to do the things I want to do. Namely, sleep, watch film noirs, and do this podcast. A few weeks back, when I was chatting with Fred from the Twilight Zone, I mentioned that I've been a bit taken aback by how much time my podcast takes to produce. Way more than I ever thought it would. And how I've been considering various solutions to remedy that. Adjusting the format is one of those possible solutions. Maybe covering 2 episodes a week isn't where this podcast needs to be. Maybe one episode a week. But then we lose the compare and contrast piece, which I really enjoy, and I think that's what mainly sets us apart from the competition. Not that we're competing, right, guys? Guys? So maybe we stick with 2 episodes at a time, but on a bi-weekly basis. I don't know. I'm still kind of sorting it all out. If you'll recall, I initially committed to 13 weeks, which is coming up fast. But I can say that I do want to keep it going after that. I just might need to tweak things some. Maybe you, yes, you, have some thoughts on this subject. You can hit us up on Facebook. Just search for @ZonePod and you'll find us. That's ZONEPOD. We are also on Tumblr, same search parameter. Or you can email us directly at zonepod@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. And I'm going to ask again, since nobody's biting, please, please, please take a minute and leave us a review/rating on iTunes. The download numbers tell me that a lot of people are listening to this podcast, but almost nobody's talking about it. This is a bit of a group effort, people. If you like the show, spread the word. Like us, share us, get a damn bullhorn and wake your neighbors up about it. Come on, people. So I'm going to saddle up now and ride off into the sunset. We'll be back directly to cover 2 episodes, I promise, 2 episodes of The Twilight Zone. Until then, cowpokes, keep your spurs shiny and sharp, and consarn it all, play nice. Giddy up!
Light and shadow.